So let's take a look at the basic tools that come with SketchUp. And I'll basically make my way across from the left to the right, just kind of going through them one by one. First of all, each tool, like you might imagine in other programs, can be selected by clicking on the tool. There are also the possibility to find those tools hidden under all of these menus. And of course, each command has a keyboard shortcut, or many of them do. And you'll see those referenced here in the pull-down menus. I find that it's actually really good to learn those keyboard shortcuts, and I've even created a few custom ones to take advantage of my left-handedness, which means I tend to type with my right hand. So I have a few that are easier for right-handed typing. But anyway, I'm going to click on the select command, and like a lot of other programs, the select command looks like an arrow, and you just click on objects to select them. Note that this uses the AutoCAD style selection and crossing windows. If I click and drag off of any object, I get a solid box when I drag to the right. Anything that falls entirely within that box, see how the scale figure doesn't fall entirely within the box until now. Once he does, he's selected. Crossing windows, when I click and drag from the right to the left, anything that touches that crossing box will get selected. You can also hold down Shift to add to your selection or subtract from the selection. Anyway, the eraser key, well, you can probably guess what that does. That erases things. If you type undo, Command Z, that brings back the objects. If you hold down Shift while using the eraser key, it will hide an item. You might say, well, wait, it looks like it's erased. Well, I can view those hidden objects. There he is. Okay, and anyway, I can also undo, Command Z, or Control Z to undo that. Now, the next command over, the line command, looks suspiciously like a pencil. When you click once to start drawing the pencil, you get a rubber band line, again, similar to the AutoCAD world. What you'll notice is that when my mouse comes into alignment with either of the axes, it matches the color of that axis, and you even get a little tooltip which tells you which axis you're following. So this is the green axis, this is the red axis, and I can even find the blue axis. Note that the line is not graphically parallel to that blue line. That's because we're in three-point perspective. So as I get farther from the origin here, which is 0, 0, 0, it looks like the lines are going to a vanishing point, and that's because they are, because it's a three-point perspective. So you just click again to finish the line. You'll get a new rubber banding line, which allows you to continue drawing. You'll also get a number of keyboard references that allow you to lock inferences to other points. You can even hold down Shift to force it to stay in that inference, that locked into that inference. That's what I'm doing right now. Obviously, you can't see my keyboard. And when you do that, it will say constrained on line. Okay. And again, if I wanted to stay on the green axis, I can hold down Shift. It's easy enough to draw along the axes, but sometimes you start getting some very complicated inferences, and it can be quite difficult to get the lines to line up. Here, if I force it to stay in the red direction, I can move my mouse over some other point, and it will constrain that line on the red axis and from that point, and that's a way that you can draw a fairly quick shape. Okay. Hidden under the line command, if you click and drag on the command, there is the freehand command, and this allows you to draw funny shapes. It doesn't draw particularly smoothly, but if you draw so that you end of your line meets the beginning, it will fill in the shape, and that's a shape that can be manipulated and moved in different ways. Next over is the arc command. You just click on that one. There are a number of different ways to draw arcs. The most typical one is the two-point arc, where you draw the endpoints. I'll draw them along the X axis here, and then you complete them using the third point. And often you'll find yourself in different places where you need to draw these different shapes. And of course there is the pie command, which draws a nice slice of pie, which we all know is delicious. Anyway, next over is some of the basic shapes. There's circles, rectangles, polygons, and rotated rectangles. I'll show you what each of those does. A circle, basically you click to draw the center point and then click to draw the radius. If you look down on the lower right of your screen, you'll see a readout of what that radius is. It is possible to type in a number. So for example, if I type in 16, that is 16 inches. You can see down here, I don't need to click in that area, and that's a way to draw it a little more precisely. A polygon, you'll see by default you can have 6 sides, but I could make it 8 sides just by typing in the number 8. Then you click and draw the center and the outside. A rectangle, like you might imagine, is also a fairly simple shape to draw. When you draw a rectangle, by the way, when you click to start it, you can also type in dimensions. Watch what happens on the lower right of my screen when I type in, say, 10 feet, comma, 6 feet, and hit enter. It will draw a rectangle that's that exact dimension. Now I'm going to delete some of these guys so that I have a nice little free area here in my drawing. We don't need quite so many shapes floating around. The last shape here that's a standard shape is a rotated rectangle. What that allows you to do is draw a rectangle up off of the ground. And each of these angles can be specified, or you can draw them just graphically the way I did. Okay. There's other ways to create this shape. For example, if I select the edge of this shape and move it, I can move it down to the ground. I can move it left and right. So there are other ways to create these. In fact, I can even grab an endpoint and start creating some pretty weird shapes just by dragging the edge of it. All right. Let's see. What do we have here? Next in the row is something called push-pull. Push-pull is really the basic way that you create three-dimensional geometry in SketchUp. Push-pull allows you to take a surface, and SketchUp is a surface modeler, and extrude it along a path. I can click and just move my mouse up. I'm not clicking and dragging, I'm just clicking. What's nice is any flat surface can be extruded. You can also tap the Alt button or Control on a PC, and it extrudes but makes a copy. So now when I select the copy, I can move it, but it doesn't alter the original shape. Also, I have exposed the hidden geometry in an earlier step. When you have hidden geometry, such as in this kind of tube shape here, you can now push-pull parts of that tube, or even push-pull it all the way through and create an opening through that object. So push-pull, very handy command. Now, offset. Offset is a really nice command for a number of different features. Here I'll just draw myself a little rectangle, and let's say I want it to have some thickness. Maybe I want to make it into a wall or a table. I can use offset to click inside the surface and then match that profile outside it some distance. And I can even type in a number, 4, for example. And now I have something that I can modify. So for example, I can push-pull up these surfaces and start to create a sort of ziggurat shape, again, just by push-pulling. See if we can get that going in. And create some pretty interesting shapes. Push-pull, by the way, and most of these other commands, you can click on a surface to move it or push-pull it, and make reference to other edges by moving your mouse over those other edges. It's a nice way to get things to be perfectly aligned, or not if you don't want them aligned. Okay, the move command is fairly straightforward. The only trick is that you have to select an object first. Some objects are easy to select, like a line. I can just select it and I can move it. And you'll see that I can move in the blue axis or in other axis if the geometry allows it. If you want to select an object and its bounding edges, a face and its edges, you'll have to double click on it. You see how if I click just the center, that's just the face. I'll delete it. And now you just see lines. If I double click on it, now I just have the edges and the center face. See, I'll delete them all. Finally, if I double click on it, but then hold down Shift and get rid of the face, I could delete these edges. What you'll see, though, is a face cannot exist without edges, so I can't delete just that. Now, what if I want to select a three-dimensional object, like one of these kind of strange half tables? Then I can triple click on the surface, any one surface of that face, and you see how it selects the whole thing. I can also hold down Shift and triple click on its partner and select them both at the same time. Now, I could also draw a selection window and get them the same way. You could also quadruple click on some object, but what you will find is actually nothing happens when you quadruple click. I just like to think about what they might do if they ever decided to activate that. Anyway, so those are the basic drawing commands that we tend to use. One or two others that are out there that are kind of interesting. First of all, the scale command is very nice. If you select some object, and I've selected this half tube, and choose the scale command, you get kind of a three-dimensional matrix with these little boxes that are essentially grips that allow you to change the size of the object in any number of different directions. And again, the snapping features that I mentioned, where I can snap to align with other faces, are still in effect. And by choosing different ones of these grips, you can really get some interesting warping effects. So that's the scale command. The tape measure command is also very handy because it allows you to put in things like reference lines. So for example, let's say I wanted to draw a line, but I wanted it to be a foot away from this surface here. I can just move my tape measure down, type in 12 for 12 inches, and now it leaves this reference line here. I can draw, let's say, a line from some other object to that reference line, or I can just start drawing on that reference line if I wanted to. So, and these reference lines are really great when you want to position different objects aligned with certain features. And they are drawing objects that can be selected, moved, and deleted, rotated, other things. Obviously, you can also just use it to measure the distance between objects. Now, next along our line of different tools here is the text tool. The text tool, very similar to most other CAD type of programs. You can click on an object and move your cursor away, and it has a leader line with a piece of text attached to it. Now, depending on what you click on, you'll get different information. So I clicked on this surface, and it gives me the square footage. I can change that to be, something more descriptive. And that's a piece of text that I can edit later on if I so desire, just by double-clicking on it with the select command. If I use the text tool on something like a component, it will tell you the name of the component. Okay, let me show you that again. Click and drag, and the name of this component is Chris. Okay. And components are ready-made objects that SketchUp uses a lot to save you time drawing. All right, next is the paint bucket. One last piece of information about the text tool. If you click on the drawing area but not on an object, you basically end up with a piece of text that is just floating in space. Whoops, except it should be spelled correctly. And what's a little funny about that is other text is view specific. So you see how as I zoom in and out, the text moves to try and adjust its position to make sense. When you draw on the drawing area, it's sort of like you're drawing on the screen. That text will remain in place, and it will not allow you to move it around. You can right-click on it and get a number of other features. I'm just going to show the fonts here so that you can get a sense of what fonts are available. It's pretty much your usual system fonts that you'd see in most computers. Again, it's just a little funny because it sits there in space. That is nice if you are presenting your model to someone, though. Now, so that's text. Next in line here is the paint bucket. Now, this is pretty much everybody's favorite tool. Well, not everybody's favorite tool, but it's my favorite tool. The Mac and PC versions do vary somewhat. But the basic idea is that the PC version looks kind of like this, where there are a number of different categories. For example, you can paint things to look glassy or like glass block. You can choose metal, and it doesn't render it, so it's not a rendering program, but it basically is applying an image, which SketchUp calls a texture, to the surfaces that you have created. And these textures can be modified in different ways. Now, one thing that is different, the Mac version has this funny crayon view, or colored pencil, I guess, which is kind of fun. I don't know why I get a kick out of that. I guess because my kids probably think it's cool. Anyway, and you can control the opacity of the paint as you paint it, which is kind of a nice feature if you want to make things that are semi-transparent. You can also use a spectrum view or sliders, the RGB sliders. There are even CMYK and grayscale sliders if you're so inclined. So it is kind of nice, depending on how you like to perceive colors, you can choose in different ways. All right, so that's basically it for the sort of drawing and editing commands, a little bit of annotation. The last few commands here on the main part of the toolbar are view modification commands. The orbit command spins the model in space. Pan is sort of like putting your hand on the, I don't know, three-dimensional space representation and moving it. Again, these are fairly common. Both of these can be accessed by the scroll wheel. If I click and drag the scroll wheel, I get the orbit command. If I click and drag the scroll wheel and the left mouse button, I get the pan command. Zoom also operates in the same way. And one thing that's kind of cool is if you want to change the field of view, like a lot of commands, you'll notice there are modifiers to the commands down here in the kind of command line area. Shift allows you to change the field of view. You can also do that by entering a numerical value. So if you want something highly distorted, you can type in, for example, 65 degrees, and now everything looks much more distorted in terms of perspective. So another one that is really handy here is the zoom extents button. And often what happens is you'll be, kind of drawing on some surface and getting super detailed and getting very fussy about the way things look, and you're really creating some funky thing, and then you end up being so far into your model that you can't get out. Often I'll see first-time SketchUp users get stuck in a wall. Which is kind of a funny sort of thing. Anyway, the zoom extents button, click on that, and it zooms out as far as it can go when it until it doesn't find any more objects. Okay, so zoom extents is a really handy one to kind of figure out where you are in space. Anyway, that's it for the main commands. There are a few more buttons here which we're not going to go into great detail, partly because they are covered in other places in the book. But I will show you these two here, the 3D warehouse and the extension warehouse. Let's start with the 3D warehouse. What this is a vast library of objects. For example, if you type in chair, you will see literally hundreds, in this case thousands of chairs, and they're all available for use in SketchUp. You find one you like, and I'm just going to pick one at random. Credits to whoever created this. This is a 3D model that you can download. You just click download. It's absolutely free, and you can load it directly into your model. I will warn you that some of these are a little funky. If you look at these, there's a lot of hidden geometry in these chairs. We'll get rid of this guy, and a little note. So you'll want to make sure that you're not showing hidden geometry. That'll smooth it out a little bit. But these are pretty nice looking chairs, you know, not so bad. And what's nice is they're free and they're editable. You can move them around. And in fact, when you use these objects, one thing to note, the move command works particularly well with what are called components, or which in this case is what you get off the 3D warehouse. As I move my mouse over that component, you see these grips that show up. They're sort of like little red pluses and on the different corners. Those allow you to rotate the object, and you can even rotate it based on some number if you so desire. In fact, you can even rotate it up into 3D space, which is a little funky, but maybe that works with your design concept. Anyway, 3D warehouse, very handy. The other thing that's really handy is this thing called the extension warehouse. Now, again, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here because there is a separate section on different extensions. But what you'll see is that there are a lot of extensions, many of which are free. They're kind of like apps that allow you to really customize your interface. And for example, some of these are specific to interior design, and they allow you to create all sorts of different elements. For example, wires in space, you know, if you want to, I don't know, have a lamp with wires on it. And this one in particular is free. Okay, and I have a list in my online resources of my favorite different extensions. So anyway, that's that. These other two, the extension manager allows you to, as you might imagine, manage your extensions if you use a lot of them. And I do use quite a few. And then the send to layout button. Layout is an entirely separate program that comes with SketchUp Pro that allows you to put together presentation boards and construction drawings. And that will be the subject of a separate chapter and a separate video. So that is it for the basic commands on the basic toolbar with